So over to you, Naomi.
Thank you, Becky. And it's an honour to be in such good company this evening. So thank you for inviting me to speak. So I go under the name of Inksquasher, and my talk this evening is going to be in two parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work and then a little bit about how my teaching practice has changed during COVID. So this book, a few of you will be familiar with, and it's just provided me with huge inspiration. It's a fabulous book that gives us insight into the printers of the late 19th century, known as the artistic printers, and it explores the new direction that letterpress was being taken in and the boundaries that were being pushed due to competitors. And their designs were completely wild, and they came up of unthinkable ways to set type. Now these bits of equipment grabbed my attention. The Bartholomew twister here on the left, which twisted brass rules and manipulated them. And then this one on the right, the Earhart wrinkler. So this like wrinkled and crimped brass rules. So here's a few examples of them being used. So this is a promotional card by a printer from New York City. You can see the use of the Bartholomew twister here as they've twisted the brass rules, and it gives the illusion of this scroll wrapping around the border. And again here, this is just a wild example of the compositor that's just gone crazy with the Bartholomew twister. And what I would love to see is the lockups and how they locked all this up. I think I'd learn a thing or two. But I want to see if it was still possible to create this effect, but obviously using alternative methods, since I have no access to the twister or the wrinkler. But I do have access to the School of Jewellery, being a member of staff at Birmingham City University. So here in the workshop at the School of Jewellery, they have like huge brass sheets, which they were then able to cut down for me into strips that were type high. These strips were then annealed, which softens the brass and then hardens again, so that it enables me to manipulate the brass. So here in this photograph, you can see a vise that's being used to hold a brass pole with a cut down the middle to hold the brass in place while I curled it around the pole. This piece of equipment here is incredible. Again, it's just a piece of equipment for jewelers. It's the modern day equivalent of the Earhart wrinkler. So it crimps metal. You feed it in one side and it turn the crank and it comes out the other side, all crimped. So after my first day of experimenting, I didn't produce anything mind-blowing, but the techniques worked and I just needed to perfect them. So this is an example of me using it in the title of one of my projects called Obsolete. So this project illustrated obsolete words while also looking at bringing back some obsolete techniques of letterpress printing. Another thing that I was keen to develop was my own set of Figgins circular quads, shown here on the left. And as some of you may know, they are rare to come across, and when you do come across them, they're really expensive. So I wanted to be able to set type on a curve and at an angle with ease, like any printer 80 years could have done. So I've made use of the laser cutting facilities at the university, and I've made my own set here on the right hand side. So here's an example of my work and those two things in use. You can see the brass curves here and the laser cut angles. And again, on the left hand side, the lockup, the use of the angle quads and some curved brass rule. So a lot of my inspiration for my work comes from printers before me. So this is the work of Solomon Tellingater. His work dates to the 1920s, and he mainly uses brass rule and brackets to illustrate these wonderful expressions. Joseph Zavrel, he produced these illustrations in 1946, and I just love the expressions made with really simple bits of type. This is the work of Henk van Otterloo and J.H. Moosman in 1982. they produced a series of 9 prints over 6 years, and it's titled what translates as Ornament Picture Book. But I find myself coming back to printers like these for a bit of inspiration sometimes when I'm stuck on how to create a certain expression, or what bits of type to use for hands or something like that, which I always find super difficult. So in this series here, the Winter Print series, I cleverly skirt around the issue of hands by putting mittens on the character. So this is a series that I've been producing 1 a year and just sending them out over the Christmas period. Again, you can see the use of the curved furniture at the top here, and obviously the brass rules. So I call these types of compositions typesetting puzzles. So that's when there's no 90-degree angles in which to set your type for the lockup. So you've just got to use spacing material and kind of stuff it into place until the type doesn't move, lock it up, and then you're good to print. So this was another series based on my love of the circus. It depicts type finders performing circus acts, therefore so titled The Type Circus. So this here on the right hand side is Caslon the Contortionist. This one is Mr. Baskerville's Balancing Act. And another one in the series is Frutiga the Fire Eater, which you can see on my website. And all 3 were presented by Ringmaster Renner. So the other half of my talk, which I'd like to share with you, is my teaching practice, which completely got flipped upside down during COVID. And my artistic practice kind of came to a halt because I didn't have access to the workshop at the university. So I was still expected to teach printmaking online, but I'm so used to, when I'm teaching, using all the big expensive equipment in the workshop. So I had to come up with completely new ways of teaching, which didn't require any specialist equipment, which was also budget friendly for the students. So the big thing for me that COVID brought around when reflecting on my teaching is how exclusive printmaking is to some students. And I like to think that I've come out the other end, making printmaking more accessible and more inclusive. So there's a number of reasons why some students don't and can't access the printmaking facilities. And I've never offered alternatives to these until the pandemic. Some students just live too far away, and it's expensive to commute in on the train, especially when it's mandatory that they have to come in for face-to-face teaching with their tutors. Financial cost to printmaking, like there are costs when students use the workshop. I have students with social anxiety that can't attend my group workshops. They need to come in when it's quiet, or they can have a one-to-one session with me. Flexibility with timing and days, because some students work and they have childcare commitments. And by no means this is not an exhaustive list. But the pandemic it's given me time to create new classes and techniques that I've previously overlooked. It's also given me the time to record techniques and get them online so that students can access classes at any time. And it's allowed me to incorporate a blended approach to my teaching. So I'm aware of the time. I'll quickly flick through a few of these, but I just want to share a few alternative printmaking examples that I've successfully taught with students from home that are budget friendly. So lino printing, we just swapped out the Battleship grey lino, which is fairly hard, to a soft cut lino, and it just means that we can print at home easily and there's no need for a press. Also swapping out ink for stamp pads, which means you don't need the faff of cleaning any ink up, you don't need to purchase a roller, you don't need space to be rolling ink out. This is just a few examples that the students have done. This is a fun workshop that I just found on YouTube. This is EVA foam, which when heated up with a hairdryer, and then you can, when it's soft, you can press a textured object into it, hold it there for 20 seconds till the foam hardens again, And then you have a the relief, not the relief, the opposite of a relief, pressed into the foam of the textured object, which then using the stamp pads, you can create some, so I teach about kind of like the extensiveness of symmetry and rotation and pattern design. And then we'll contextualize these prints by turning them into folded books in another session. An alternative to collagraph printing, just with a cereal box and a craft knife. So if you just peel away the top layer of a cereal box, you're kind of left with two layers, an intaglio layer and a relief layer. So just this top surface gets inked, leaving you with some negative spaces. So on the left are the prints we printed with a spoon, and on the right is the cardboard, the plates even. Again, another workshop that I found on YouTube with styrofoam, which is very inexpensive, and just colouring it in with felt tip pens and transferring it to damp paper. It just creates some really wonderful textures, and the colours come out really vibrant in contrast to the felt tip pen when it's drawn onto the styrofoam. This is a monoprinting alternative, which I found out about through Dan Tyrrell's YouTube channel. He's got heaps of videos, well worth checking out. I'll put it in the conversation box after my talk. But he does monoprints with oil paint, and I personally prefer the lines and the texture that you get in contrast to the ink that we've been using for the past 8 years at the university. So the ink, the oil paint is just applied to a carrier bag and using a frame around the paper to create a neat border. Dry point alternatives. So this was inspired by Stephen Fowler, who teaches illustration at Worcester. Just using milk bottles or juice packs like Tetra packs, and using a pasta press. So the pasta press is a wonderful thing. It's basically an etching press, but budget friendly, and you can use it at home. So it costs between £5 and £20. You can find it in a charity shop, on Gumtree, on Facebook, your parents' house at the back of a cupboard. And it just produces some amazing prints, really. I highly recommend them. Foam stamps again, but with the really thin foam. You can buy them in Poundland or The Works, any craft shop. And we cut out shapes and put them on, just glue them onto cardboard or foam board. Or on the top right here, this one is stuck onto a peanut butter lid. And again, I just teach symmetry and pattern with this technique. And this is the same idea, but with the soft cut lino and stamp pads again. And the overprinting is inspired by Sarah Matthews. Again, another alternative for embossing using the pasta press machine. There are 2 uses of pasta press machine, probably more. So just cardboard, cut out cardboard with a craft knife, some good quality watercolor paper, damp, produces some really lovely deep embossings. Collagraph plates, so instead of inking the plates that you make, we just use crayons over the top, so you can do multiple color collagraphs just using a registration sheet. Here I've used just things that I've found around the house, like rice or the netting that oranges come in. What else have I used for texture? Nail varnish, masking tape. This is the stuff, the filler for filling holes in the walls. That worked really well. And this is what it looks like with the, when it's not printed, crayoned, is that a word? And my last slide, digital letterpress. So this tutorial was from David Wolski on using wood type on Photoshop and colorizing it and creating lifelike color interactions. So I printed our entire wood collection at the university and created PDF scans and uploaded them onto our intranet. So I've created like a digital type case of wood type. and a Photoshop tutorial explaining how students can work with the scans, just like they would do in the workshop, and with the colours and overprinting. Because due to COVID, the workshop, now that it is open, it's got restrictions. So this digital option just means that the students have access to all the typefaces still, and they're now available to work with digitally from home. So yeah, that's a quick insight into my teaching during COVID times. Thank you for listening, everyone.